Cruise ships are meant for relaxation and escape. But what if the vacation turns into a nightmare you can never wake up from? Tonight, we dive into 5 real horror encounters at sea, carefully rechecked from forums, Reddit, and survivor testimonies. These aren't urban legends. They're chilling accounts that real passengers swear happened on board. From cabins that don't exist to whispers in the dead of night, every detail will leave you questioning if you'd ever dare step on a cruise again. Stick with me till the end, and if these stories send chills down your spine, subscribe to Midnight Outcry, hit the bell icon, and drop a comment below sharing which encounter scared you the most. Now, let's dim the lights and step aboard. Story 1. The first thing I noticed about the ship was how unnaturally quiet it felt for something carrying thousands of passengers. I had boarded with the usual excitement, but by the time I dragged my suitcase down the long, carpeted hallway toward my cabin, something about the silence had already wrapped itself around me like a second skin. No footsteps, no muffled voices through the doors, just the hum of the engines, deep and steady, like a heartbeat I didn't trust. My name is Aaron, and I didn't sign up for this cruise willingly. My sister had insisted. She said after everything I'd been through the past year, I needed an escape. A week at sea, no work, no distractions. She promised, "It'll be good for you." But I knew from the first night that this wasn't going to be a normal trip. Cabin 943. That was mine. At check-in, the girl at the desk hesitated for a split second before handing me the key card. It was subtle. So subtle I might have missed it if I hadn't already been on edge. Her hand lingered on the plastic card a beat too long, her eyes flicking up to meet mine with something like pity. Inside, the room looked ordinary. Small bed pressed against the wall, tiny desk with a lamp, a porthole showing the endless black sea. But the air felt stale, almost metallic, like blood on coins. I remember standing in the doorway, suitcase still in my hand, and feeling this irrational urge to not step inside. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I swore I heard someone pacing in the hallway. Slow, dragging steps. Then, silence. Then again, a few hours later, a faint knock, 3 taps on my door. When I pulled it open, no one was there. And here's where I'll pause for just a second, because if you've made it this far into my story, you should probably subscribe to Midnight Outcry. These aren't just tales, they're records of real encounters, checked and rechecked, pulled from people who swore they lived through them. Stick around, because it only gets darker from here. By the second day, I noticed something strange. No one else on my hallway seemed to exist. Every door I passed had numbers, but I never saw a single passenger step out. Once, I pressed my ear to a door, 942, right next to mine. Silence. Too much silence. Like the room was a shell with nothing inside. At dinner, when I asked a crew member if the hallway was just underbooked, his face stiffened. He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes and muttered something about overflow accommodations. Then, he walked away quickly, tray rattling in his hands. The third night, things escalated. The pacing in the hallway grew louder, closer, until it stopped right outside my door. I could see the shadow through the gap at the bottom, a pair of feet standing motionless. They stayed there for almost an hour. When I finally worked up the courage to yank the door open, the hallway was empty again, but my rug was wet, like someone had stood dripping on it. That's when I realized whatever was outside wasn't just passing by, it wanted in. And that was only the beginning. The morning after that soaked rug incident, I woke up with my head pounding. My first thought was that maybe I'd imagined it, just some twisted trick of exhaustion. But when I bent down, the fibers of the carpet still smelled faintly of salt. Not sweat, not spilled water. Ocean. Breakfast was supposed to be my distraction. I walked into the main dining hall, and it was alive with clatter and chatter. Forks hitting plates, laughter echoing off the chandeliers. I thought maybe I could drown the unease in normalcy. But the thing about paranoia is it follows you into the light. When I sat down at a long table, the woman across from me leaned in without introduction. She was middle-aged, hair tied in a neat bun, eyes darting like she was afraid of being overheard. "You're in 943, aren't you?" she whispered. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. "How do you know that?" Her lips pressed into a thin line and she shook her head. "Just be careful at night. Don't answer if it knocks." Before I could ask more, a waiter passed by and she clammed up instantly. She shoved her tray away, muttered something about losing her appetite, and hurried out of the hall. It left me rattled and curious. What did she know about my cabin? Why had she warned me? That night, I did the one thing I probably shouldn't have done. I waited for the knock. It came around 2 a.m. Soft at first, then harder, more insistent. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps again. My chest tightened as I crept to the door. This time, I didn't fling it open. I crouched down, eye level with the floor, and peered at the shadow under the gap. The feet weren't there this time, but something was moving, slow, deliberate, dragging along the carpet like fingers. I swear I saw 5 thin shapes stretch across the light. I stumbled back, heart hammering, and that's when the lamp on my desk flickered. Not the whole ship, just that one lamp. Flicker, pause, flicker again, like a signal. Then, silence. I barely slept, but when morning came I stormed to the reception desk. The same girl who'd checked me in was there. Her smile faltered the second she recognized me. "What's going on with cabin 943? I demanded. Her lips parted, but before she could speak, a man in a navy jacket, some kind of supervisor, appeared at her side. He cut in smoothly. "Is there a problem, sir?" I repeated my question. His smile was too polished, too rehearsed. "Sir, every cabin is perfectly safe. You may just be experiencing the usual discomfort of adjusting to life at sea." He guided me away with a hand on my shoulder, and when I glanced back, the receptionist looked pale, her hands clenched at her sides. That should have been enough to convince me to switch rooms, but something inside me, curiosity, maybe stubbornness, kept me anchored to 943. The 4th night was when things stopped being subtle. At exactly 3 a.m., the porthole rattled violently. I shot up in bed, the sheets clinging to me with sweat. The window shook as if something was pounding on it from the outside. But we were mid-ocean, miles from shore, nothing but black waves. And then I saw it. No, them. Pale faces pressed against the glass. Half-formed, distorted by the curve of the porthole. Mouths moving soundlessly. Hands slapping the glass, leaving wet streaks. I scrambled back until I hit the opposite wall, but the faces didn't vanish. They just stayed there, pressed against the glass, watching. And when the lamp flickered again, I understood it wasn't just a signal. It was communication. Something, or someone, inside the room was answering them, and I wasn't alone anymore. By the 5th day, I couldn't shake the sense that my cabin had become a trap. I kept replaying those pale faces against the porthole, the way they looked like they were pressing in from another world, silently begging to be let inside. I'd convinced myself the smart thing to do was switch rooms, just get out. So I went to the front desk again, only to be told flatly, "We're at full capacity. No other cabins available." The man in the navy jacket, same one who had cut me off before, stood nearby, watching me with that polite smile that never touched his eyes. "Sir, if it makes you more comfortable, we can send housekeeping to check your cabin," he offered. The idea of strangers poking around my room while I wasn't there didn't sit right, but I nodded anyway. "Fine, do it." When I returned later that afternoon, everything looked the same. Bed neatly made, bathroom cleaned. But there was one detail that set my teeth on edge. On the desk, my lamp, the one that always flickered, was gone, replaced with a newer, shinier model. At first, I thought maybe housekeeping had swapped it out, but taped under the base of the new lamp, barely visible, was a small strip of masking tape with 3 numbers written in pen. 943. Why label a lamp with my cabin number? And why leave it so obvious? That night, the knocking returned. Not on the door this time, on the walls. Hollow thuds echoed from inside the plaster, crawling along the room. Knock, pause, knock, knock, pause. Like it was searching for a way in. I pressed my ear against the wall and nearly recoiled. There was breathing. Not faint, not imagined. Heavy, labored breaths seeping through the barrier like someone pressed their lips right up against the plaster. I barely slept, tossing in bed, counting the hours until daylight. But it wasn't just the cabin anymore. The next morning, I tried to clear my head by walking the decks. The sea stretched endlessly around us, sunlight glittering on the water. For the first time in days, I thought maybe I was free from that suffocating dread. Until I noticed the same middle-aged woman who'd warned me earlier. She stood near the rail, staring out at the horizon. I approached cautiously, and without turning her head, she said, "You stayed in the room." "How do you know about it?" I asked. She turned then, and her expression was hollow, as if the life had drained out of her. "Because I did too. 2 years ago, same cabin." Her voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. "It doesn't matter where you go on this ship now. It's already chosen you." I pressed her, desperate for answers, but she suddenly froze, eyes darting behind me. When I turned, a crew member in uniform was standing there, too close, smiling that same rehearsed smile I was starting to hate. "Enjoying the ocean view, sir?" he asked politely. When I turned back, the woman was gone. I swear, she vanished. There was nowhere for her to run that quickly, not with the open deck stretching wide, but she wasn't there anymore. That night, I made the mistake of trying to leave the cabin for good. I packed my bag, stormed down the hall, and headed toward the stairwell. But the ship seemed to twist beneath me. Every corner looped me back to the same hallway. Same numbered doors. 9, 3, 9, 9, 4, 1, 9, 4, 3. Again and again, until I realized I wasn't just lost. The ship wasn't letting me leave. And when I finally opened the door to what should have been a different cabin, the number on the wall confirmed my nightmare. It was mine. I had circled back to 943, and this time the door wasn't closed. It was wide open, waiting. The cabin stood open like a mouth, black and silent, breathing me in. I froze in the hallway, suitcase handle trembling in my grip. Every instinct screamed at me to walk away, but the corridors had already proven themselves endless traps. There was nowhere else to go. The moment I stepped across the threshold, the air shifted. It was colder. So cold I saw my breath fog in the dim light. My new lamp flickered once, then buzzed to life, casting the room in a sickly yellow glow. The number taped under the base glinted faintly, almost daring me to peel it away. I dropped my suitcase on the bed and bent down. The tape wasn't just masking tape anymore. It was parchment, dry, brittle, stained with something dark. The numbers 943 were written not in pen, but in what looked like thick, dried ink. Or blood. My hands shook as I tore it free. And beneath the lamp's base, etched into the metal itself, was a phrase, another one for the ship. My stomach lurched. I slammed the lamp off, but the words seemed to glow faintly in the dark. Then came the whispering. It started as a murmur from the walls, like dozens of voices speaking at once, overlapping, weaving together into something that wasn't quite language. When I pressed my palms against the plaster, the surface rippled under my touch, like skin, like there was something inside pressing outward. And then, knock, knock, knock. The door swung shut behind me, locking itself. I spun around, heart pounding, yanking at the handle. Nothing. The whispers grew louder. My suitcase toppled from the bed and spilled open, clothes scattering across the floor. But mixed among them wasn't anything of mine. Instead, a stack of faded photographs, black and white, curling at the edges. Passengers smiling on deck, posing by lifeboats, clinking champagne glasses. And all of them, every single one, had their faces scratched out with deep, angry gouges. The final photo slid loose, face up. My breath caught. It was me, standing exactly as I had when I first boarded, suitcase in hand, nervous smile plastered on my face, and my eyes, both gouged into empty, black pits. I staggered back, throat closing, when I noticed movement in the reflection of the porthole. Not the sea, not the stars, but dozens of pale faces pressed up against the glass, their mouths moving in silent screams. Their fingers smeared trails across the window, begging entry. And then, in the middle of them, I saw her. The woman from the deck, her hollow stare fixed on me, lips forming words I couldn't hear, and then suddenly I did. The whispers in the wall synchronized with her mouth, forming a single clear sentence. "It's your turn now." The porthole glass shuddered. Cracks spiderwebbed outward as those pale hands clawed to break through. I threw myself back against the door, pounding on it, screaming for help. The metal groaned, but no one came. That was when the lamp flicked back on by itself, and this time, the numbers beneath the base had changed. 944. Not my cabin number anymore. The next one, I realized with a jolt what it meant. The ship didn't just take people, it marked them, cabin by cabin, in a cycle, and my turn was almost over. I wasn't just trapped. I was about to be replaced. As the porthole burst inward and icy seawater rushed across the floor, the last thing I heard was the crewman's polite, rehearsed voice echoing from somewhere inside the room. "Welcome aboard, sir. Enjoy your stay." The wave slammed into me, salt water burning my eyes and throat. I clawed toward the door, but the handle twisted on its own and the metal frame held firm. The cabin was filling fast, the icy tide reaching my chest, my neck, my chin. The faces in the porthole no longer screamed. They smiled. Wide, unnatural grins as if welcoming me into their silent company. The woman who had first spoken to me pressed her hand flat against the glass, and her eyes rolled white as her mouth formed one final word, "Stay." The water swallowed me whole. I thrashed, lungs bursting, until suddenly silence. No water, no pressure, no pain. I stood in the middle of the cabin, dry as bone. The bed neatly made, the suitcase zipped, the lamp glowing softly on the nightstand. But something was wrong. I stumbled toward the mirror on the wall. The reflection wasn't me anymore. My face was pale, eyes sunken, lips blue, as if I had drowned years ago. My reflection tilted its head and grinned, even though I hadn't moved a muscle. The cabin door opened behind me with a cheerful click, and a family stepped inside. A father, mother, and young boy, dragging their luggage, laughing nervously. The boy froze when he saw me. His eyes widened. "Daddy," he whispered, tugging on his father's sleeve. "Why is there a man standing in our room?" But the parents didn't see me. They walked straight through my body. I turned slowly back to the mirror. My reflection leaned forward, whispering the words that scraped against my bones. Another one for the ship. The door shut. The lock clicked, and the cycle began again. Now the question remains. How many cabins are already filled with passengers who never checked out? And when you book your next cruise, how can you be sure the number taped to your lamp doesn't already belong to someone else? Because on this ship, the dead don't leave. Story 2. You ever notice how the ocean doesn't just surround a ship, it swallows it? That's the unsettling thing about cruises. You're trapped in a floating hotel, cut off from the world, with nothing but black water below. Tonight's story comes from one such voyage, an account so chilling it never left the woman who lived through it. Her name was Vanessa Harper, a 33-year-old elementary school teacher from Oregon. She wasn't the type to chase thrills or dabble in the supernatural. This cruise was supposed to be a break, a celebration of surviving another grueling school year, spent wrangling kids, lesson plans, and standardized testing. She saved up, booked herself a mid-sized stateroom with a balcony, and told her friends she planned to, quote, sleep, eat, and finally read a book cover to cover without interruption. At least, that was the plan. From the very first night on board, Vanessa sensed something was off. The moment she stepped into her cabin, she described the air as heavy, not musty, not stale, heavy, like walking into a room where people had just been fighting and stormed out, leaving their anger hanging in the air. Her balcony view was stunning, endless waves fading into the orange horizon. But when she turned back inside, she kept getting the uneasy feeling that someone was already in the room with her. You know that sensation when the hairs on your arms rise, even before your brain processes danger? That was her constant companion. The first night, she dismissed it as travel jitters. She unpacked, showered, and tried to sleep. But sleep wouldn't come easy. At exactly 3:12 a.m., she woke to the sound of dripping. Not from the bathroom, not from the ceiling. It was right beside her bed. She flicked on the lamp. The carpet by her nightstand was soaked, a small puddle spreading outward. She swore it hadn't been there when she went to bed. Startled, she went to grab towels, only to realize something that made her stomach twist. The puddle wasn't water. It was dark, thick, and carried a metallic tang. Blood. She scrambled back, heart pounding, only to blink and find the puddle gone. The carpet was dry, not a drop in sight. That was night 1. On night 2, Vanessa woke to her balcony door sliding open on its own, letting in the humid ocean air. She got up to shut it, thinking maybe she'd forgotten to lock it. But when she looked out, she froze. A wet handprint, larger than her own, smeared across the glass. On the inside, that's when she began to feel watched in earnest. The cabin, once her private retreat, felt like a cage, and the thing sharing it with her was growing bolder by the hour. Vanessa tried to convince herself it was just fatigue, the mind playing tricks when overstressed. She was a teacher, for crying out loud. Logic and reason were her default settings. But logic didn't explain the way her cabin door rattled, as if someone were yanking on it from the hallway when she knew she had the deadbolt fastened. By day, the ship was a dream. Pools splashing with laughter, buffets overflowing, music drifting across sunlit decks. It was like living in 2 different realities, one dazzlingly bright and harmless, the other waiting in her cabin, drenched in unease. On the 3rd afternoon, Vanessa struck up a conversation with Eleanor, a retired nurse from Florida she met near the pool bar. Over frozen daiquiris, Vanessa casually mentioned she hadn't been sleeping well in her room. Eleanor's smile faded. "What deck are you on?" she asked. 7, Vanessa answered, midship. Cabin 714. Eleanor's face drained of color so quickly Vanessa thought she might faint. She leaned in close, her voice low. "You need to ask for a transfer, tonight." The words rattled Vanessa. She laughed nervously, waiting for Eleanor to explain. But the older woman shook her head and muttered, "They shouldn't be booking that one anymore," before excusing herself and disappearing into the crowd. That night, Vanessa left the TV on, the screen's glow her only comfort. She drifted into an uneasy half-sleep, but woke again around 3 a.m. that cursed time, when the TV cut out with a hiss of static. On the black screen, just for a flicker of a moment, she saw it, a man's reflection. He stood directly behind her bed, shoulders hunched, water dripping from his hair onto the carpet. His face was swollen, his lips an unnatural shade of blue. His eyes, lifeless yet fixed on hers, stared from the glass like he was trapped inside. Vanessa spun around so fast she nearly toppled off the mattress. No one was there. The room was empty. Silent, her body trembled as she reached for her phone to check the time. 3:12 a.m., exactly the same as the first night. She tried to leave the room, but the door wouldn't budge. No matter how she twisted the lock or shoved her weight into it, it stayed sealed, as if the cabin itself refused to let her out. The air thickened. Her ears rang. From the corner, near the balcony door, came the unmistakable sound of water spilling across the carpet. She turned slowly. A puddle was spreading again, just like before, dark, rippling, creeping closer to her bare feet. But this time, it wasn't disappearing, and when she looked up from it, she saw them. 2 wet footprints. Human, bare, and impossibly fresh. They led from the balcony toward her bed. Vanessa clutched her chest, her breath trapped like glass shards in her throat. She whispered aloud, desperate for something to break the suffocating silence. "Please, someone help me." The TV blazed back to life with a voice, not hers, not anyone she knew, whispering a single word through the static: drown. Vanessa didn't sleep for the rest of the night. She sat huddled against the cabin wall, every nerve on fire, her eyes locked on the footprints that had soaked into the carpet. By dawn, they had faded, evaporated, almost, as if they'd never been there at all. When the morning announcement came, cheerful as ever about breakfast buffets and poolside activities, Vanessa felt like she was the only person on the ship carrying a secret too heavy for daylight. At breakfast, she found Eleanor again. The old nurse didn't look surprised when Vanessa sat across from her, pale and shaking. "You saw him, didn't you?" Eleanor whispered. Vanessa's fork clattered against her plate. "Who?" "The man from the water." Eleanor's voice was flat, certain. "He shows himself around the third night. Always the same." Vanessa demanded an explanation, her hands trembling so badly she had to grip her coffee cup with both. Eleanor sighed, her gaze drifting over the crowded dining room. "Years ago," Eleanor said quietly, "a crewman died in that cabin. He jumped, or maybe he fell. No one knows. But his body was found in the sea 2 days later, swollen, blue, just as you've seen. Since then, passengers keep reporting things. Cold water on the carpet, voices on the TV, doors locking on their own. They try to keep the room booked. Ships don't like admitting they've got cursed cabins." Vanessa swallowed hard. Her rational brain clung to excuses, hallucinations, stress, cruise ship folklore. But Eleanor's steady, unblinking stare made denial impossible. "Why me?" Vanessa asked, almost in a whisper. Eleanor hesitated, then, softly, "Because he doesn't want to be forgotten. He attaches to someone each trip. Someone who notices. You've already noticed." That night, Vanessa requested a cabin transfer. The receptionist gave her a polite but firm smile. "I'm sorry, ma'am. We're fully booked." Of course they were. So Vanessa returned to cabin 714, dread pressing into her ribs like a vice. By midnight, she was pacing the room, refusing to lie down. Every sound, the hum of the AC, the groan of the walls, the faint creak of metal, made her jump. At 3:05 a.m., the balcony door shuddered. The curtains blew inward though the glass was shut tight. And then, tap, 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 knuckles rapping against the inside of the closet door. Vanessa froze. Her throat closed. She couldn't move. The tapping grew louder, sharper, until the flimsy door vibrated against its hinges. Her survival instinct screamed at her to run, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. The door handle rattled once, twice, and then turned slowly. The closet creaked open. For a split second, Vanessa saw only shadows. Then a figure leaned out, dripping seawater onto the carpet, eyes glassy and lifeless, yet fixed directly on her. The crewman. He opened his mouth. Salt water spilled from between his lips as he rasped, "It's your turn." The lights in the cabin went out. The blackout swallowed the cabin whole. Vanessa's scream caught in her throat, choked off by pure terror. She could hear water dripping, steady as a clock, closer and closer, like the figure was stepping toward her in the dark. She fumbled for her phone on the nightstand, her shaking fingers sliding across the glass. The screen lit up, casting a pale glow that illuminated the room for just a second. Empty. The closet door stood wide open, swaying gently as if breathing. No man, no dripping, nothing but the smell, salt and decay, like low tide left too long in the sun. Her breath came in gasps. She could still feel him. She knew he was there. A whisper slid against her ear. "Don't look behind you." Vanessa spun, phone light slicing through the dark. Nothing. Just the bare wall, the balcony curtains fluttering, though the door was sealed shut. That was the breaking point. She bolted from the cabin barefoot, sprinting down the hall with her phone clutched like a lifeline. A couple in evening attire stepped aside as she ran, frowning at her but saying nothing. Nobody ever said anything. She found herself in the ship's theater, nearly empty at this late hour, just a handful of crew resetting props. She collapsed into a seat, trying to slow her breathing. Eleanor appeared beside her. Vanessa didn't even question how she'd found her so quickly. "You can't keep running," Eleanor said softly. Vanessa gripped her arm. "Tell me how to stop him." The old woman studied her face. "You don't stop him. You endure him. Until the ship docks. Once you step off, he chooses someone else. But you must never acknowledge him directly. That gives him hold." Vanessa wanted to scream at her. Never acknowledge him? She'd already screamed, begged, stared into his eyes. It was too late. That night, she barricaded the closet door with furniture and slept with the lights on. Still, she dreamed of drowning. Lungs burning, hands clawing at the surface while an invisible weight dragged her under. When she woke, her sheets were damp with cold seawater. On the final night of the cruise, Vanessa avoided her cabin entirely. She stayed on deck, clutching coffee after coffee, eyes fixed on the horizon. At 2:00 a.m., a fog rolled in, swallowing the sea around them. Passengers drifted back to their rooms. She was left nearly alone, and then she heard it again. That wet, dragging footstep. He was there, in the fog. She couldn't see him, but she felt the chill rise off her skin. The footsteps circled her, too slow, too deliberate to be human. "Vanessa!" The voice bubbled up from the mist, gurgling with seawater. Her name. He knew her name. The ship's horn bellowed, tearing through the night, and just like that, the fog split. Vanessa stumbled back. The footsteps vanished. The air warmed. By sunrise, land was in sight. The moment the ship docked, Vanessa was among the first passengers to leave, clutching her bag, eyes darting back every few seconds. She didn't stop until she was in a taxi, city traffic sprawling around her. For the first time in days, she thought she might breathe again. But when she got home and unpacked, she froze. At the bottom of her suitcase, tucked between her clothes, lay a soggy pair of crewman's gloves. The same gloves she'd seen dripping on the closet floor. Water pooled beneath them. And scrawled across the inside of the lid, written in salt residue as if by a wet finger, were the words, "You can't leave the ocean." Vanessa thought she'd left it all behind. The suitcase went straight into the trash, gloves and all. She scrubbed her floors until her knees ached, but still the faint smell of brine clung to her apartment. Neighbors upstairs probably thought she was mad, airing out her unit at 2 in the morning, windows wide open to the city air. For a few days, life seemed to steady. She returned to her office job, smiled at coworkers who commented on her post-vacation glow, and forced herself to laugh like she'd actually had a normal holiday. She even convinced herself the whole thing had been a trick of exhaustion, maybe even sleep paralysis. But the ocean doesn't forget. The first sign came during a shower. She closed her eyes, rinsing shampoo from her hair, when the water pressure changed. The steady stream turned sluggish, heavy. She opened her eyes. Brownish water trickled from the showerhead, carrying flakes of seaweed. The drain gurgled, coughing up a stream of bubbles. She staggered back, heart racing. For a moment, she thought she saw fingers press against the glass of the shower door from the inside. That night, sleep brought the drowning dream again. Only this time, she wasn't struggling in open water. She was trapped in her own bathtub, lungs filling, the sound of waves pounding against tiles. She woke coughing, salt water spilling from her mouth onto the sheets. Her phone buzzed. A text. "Unlisted number. You looked right at me." She deleted it, blocked the number. But they kept coming, each message dripping with seawater stains that smeared across the screen as if the phone itself was wet. One night, desperate, she called Eleanor. Somehow, she'd saved the old woman's number, scratched hastily onto the back of a drink receipt. Eleanor answered on the second ring, voice flat. "I told you never to acknowledge him." "I didn't know," Vanessa stammered. "Now he knows your name. He'll never let go. You belong to the water." And then the line cut. The next morning, Vanessa's co-workers found her desk chair empty, her laptop open, coffee still steaming beside it. Security cameras showed her walking into the building lobby, but never walking out. Some say she jumped from a ferry weeks later, her name called in whispers across the waves. Others believe she's still out there, on some midnight cruise, no ticket ever records, staring out from a cabin window that shouldn't exist. And if you ever find yourself on a ship, standing alone in the fog, listen closely. If you hear wet footsteps behind you, don't turn around. Because once you look, he'll know your name too. Story 3. I didn't book the cruise. That's the first thing I need you to understand. My name is Rachel. I'm a school teacher from Ohio, and I had zero intention of ever stepping foot on a luxury ship. My idea of vacation is a cabin in the woods with patchy Wi-Fi, not a floating hotel with casinos and water slides. But the ticket came in the mail, first class, all expenses paid, with my name printed in perfect block letters. No sender, no explanation, just an embossed envelope with the ship's crest, the ocean's embrace. At first I thought it was a scam, some too-good-to-be-true sweepstakes. But when I called the cruise line, they confirmed it. My name was on the manifest. Cabin 309, paid in full. They even emailed the boarding pass. Friends told me not to go. My sister begged me to throw the ticket away. But something about it gnawed at me. Who spends thousands of dollars on a stranger? Who knew my home address? I told myself I'd just board, poke around, and leave at the next port if it got weird. But from the moment I walked up the gangway, I felt chosen. The other passengers were buzzing with excitement, snapping selfies with their cocktails. But the crew barely looked at me except for one man, an older steward with hollow cheeks and eyes like clouded glass. When he scanned my ticket, his lips moved around words he didn't say aloud. His gaze lingered as if he were memorizing me. Inside, the ship gleamed. Polished wood railings, chandeliers that swung gently with the motion, carpeting that smelled faintly of salt and mildew no amount of cleaning could hide. The hallways seemed endless, repeating patterns that made me dizzy. My cabin was waiting, door already unlocked. Cabin 309. Spacious. Too spacious. The bed was turned down as if someone expected me. A bowl of fruit sat on the desk, though the bananas were spotted black and the grapes shriveled. I picked one up, and a trail of tiny ants scattered. I almost left right then. But on the dresser sat a note, folded into a perfect square. In neat handwriting, it read, "Welcome aboard, Rachel. We've been waiting for you." And here's the thing. When I turned the paper over, the back was damp, as if it had been pressed against seawater before drying. I froze. That's when the lights flickered. Just for a second, but long enough to notice the mirror across the room. My reflection wasn't standing still. It was leaning forward, closer, smiling faintly, though I wasn't. If you're still listening this far, make sure you're subscribed to Midnight Outcry. There are stories that sound fake, and then there are the ones you wish were. The cruise hadn't even left port yet, and already I knew I was in trouble. When the horn finally blasted, rattling the glassware in my cabin, I was sitting stiff on the edge of the bed, clutching that note like it might explain itself if I squeezed hard enough. The ship pulled away from the port, crowds waving, streamers falling into the water. The cheer outside clashed with the silence inside my room. I tried convincing myself it was some elaborate marketing trick, maybe a gimmick for a viral campaign. But when I opened the cabin door, the hallway was deserted. No laughter, no luggage rolling across the carpet, not even a murmur of conversation, just the soft hum of the ship's engines vibrating through the walls. That was when I noticed the cabin doors across from mine. Each one had a neat brass number, 307, 311. But directly opposite 309, nothing. The door stood there, blank, no number, no peephole. I walked closer, pressing my ear against it. Silence. Then, faintly, scratching, not like nails, more like wood being carved from the inside. My stomach lurched. I turned back, nearly colliding with a crew member wheeling a cart piled with linens. He didn't flinch. His expression was blank, eyes fixed forward. I stammered, "Excuse me, do you know what's behind that door?" He didn't stop, didn't even glance at me. Just rolled past as if I wasn't there. The wheels squeaked once, then silence. At dinner, the strangeness deepened. The dining hall was grand, golden chandeliers above, violins playing softly near the buffet. I sat at a long table where plates were already laid out, wine glasses filled. Other passengers filtered in, couples, families, a man in a navy suit who nodded politely. Conversation swirled around me, but whenever I spoke, no one replied. I asked the woman beside me where she was from. She chewed her steak and smiled vaguely, like she hadn't heard. I thought maybe I was paranoid, until the violinists shifted their song. The melody slowed, dipping into minor chords that made my skin crawl. No one else reacted. Forks clinked, children laughed, but the music kept bending, sour and uneasy. Halfway through the meal, I glanced back toward the doors, and there he was again, the older steward, the one who'd scanned my ticket, standing motionless in the corner. His hands clasped behind his back, his head tilted ever so slightly toward me. When I blinked, he was gone. Later that night, restless, I walked the upper deck. The sea stretched black and endless, the moon smearing silver across the waves. I leaned against the railing, trying to steady my nerves. That's when I felt it. The ship shuddering, almost imperceptibly, like something enormous brushed against the hull beneath. A vibration that rolled through my bones. I wasn't the only one who noticed. A man in a hoodie a few feet away jerked his head toward the water, his face pale in the moonlight. Our eyes met. He opened his mouth to say something, then froze. Behind me, footsteps echoed. I turned. The deck was empty. When I looked back at the man in the hoodie, he was gone. Not walking away, not slipping inside. Just gone. Back in my cabin, I locked the door, shoved a chair under the handle. My reflection in the mirror still felt wrong, like it lagged behind me by a fraction of a second. And on the dresser, next to the wilted fruit, a new note had appeared. Cabin 309 was never meant to be occupied. Stay inside after midnight. I hadn't written it. I hadn't heard anyone enter. Yet there it was, the ink still glistening like it had been written seconds ago. The clock on the wall read 11:58. The second hand on the cabin clock jerked forward, 11:59. The walls seemed to tighten, pressing in with each tick. I sat frozen on the bed, eyes flicking between the note and the door, trying to decide if I should obey the warning or do the exact opposite. Then the lights flickered. Once, twice, and the entire cabin plunged into darkness. The hum of the ship's engine faltered, dipping low like a groan from somewhere deep beneath the waterline. I scrambled for my phone, but when I pressed the power button, the screen remained black. Not dead, just unresponsive. A sound rose in the silence. Not footsteps. Not the muffled voices of late-night wanderers. This was different. Low, drawn-out scraping, like something dragging metal along the hallway carpet. It moved slowly, deliberately, passing each cabin door, coming closer. The chair braced under my handle shuddered once, then again. Whatever was outside didn't knock. It pressed, hard, making the wood creak. I backed up, tripping over my bag, breathing shallow. The door didn't break. The scraping moved on, fading into the distance. But before relief could settle, another sound replaced it. Whispers, not one voice, many, layered, weaving over each other, rising and falling in an inhuman rhythm. They weren't in the hallway anymore, they were inside the walls, behind my headboard, beneath the floor, surrounding me. I covered my ears, but the whispers grew sharper, cutting through the bone. Phrases emerged, not in English, not in any language I recognized, yet somehow I understood the intent. Join us, Below, always below. A sudden crack snapped me upright. The mirror. A fracture split down the center, jagged like a lightning bolt. My reflection stared back at me, but its lips moved even though mine were sealed. Silent words, perfectly synced to the whispers in the walls. The clock ticked once more. 12:00, midnight. Every light in the room flared back on at once. Too bright, blinding. The mirror went dark, reflecting nothing but shadow. My ears rang in the sudden silence. And then came the knock. 3 sharp raps. Not at my door. At the blank one across the hall, the one with no number. I crept to the peephole, hands shaking. The corridor was empty, yet the knocking continued. Louder, more urgent. Finally, a voice. A woman's. Smooth, calm, but laced with something cold. You shouldn't have come here, but since you have, you'll have to choose. The handle of the numberless door rattled. I stumbled back, heart hammering. The note on my dresser fluttered to the floor, caught in a draft that shouldn't have existed in a sealed cabin. When I picked it up, the writing had changed. Open it, or it opens you. I stared at the note until the letters blurred. My chest heaved like I'd been running, though I hadn't moved an inch. The sound of the numberless door handle twisting echoed in my skull. It was steady, patient, like whatever was inside knew I would eventually give in. But I didn't. I bolted. Yanking the chair from under my own door, I swung it open and stumbled into the corridor. The hallway lights flickered, long stretches of shadow breaking across the patterned carpet. I could still hear it. The faint knock, knock, knock from across the hall. But I didn't dare look back. I hurried toward the atrium, the ship's heart where all the passengers gathered during the day. At this hour, it should have been empty, silent. Instead, I heard voices, laughter, the clink of glasses. Relief washed over me until I stepped inside. The grand lounge glowed with warm golden light, chandeliers glittering like nothing was wrong. Dozens of passengers mingled around the piano, sipping champagne, dressed in the same elegant evening attire I'd seen them wearing at dinner hours earlier. But there was something off. Their movements were too smooth, too synchronized. Their laughter hollow. And their eyes. Every single one of them turned to me at once. A woman in a red gown broke from the group, her smile wide but her face stiff. Like a mask stretched too tight, she raised her glass. "You heard the knock, didn't you?" I froze. The others began to whisper, not like conversation, but like a chorus, all at once. The same alien cadence I'd heard in my walls. Below, below, below. I backed away. Their bodies shifted together, like a tide, moving closer without breaking rhythm. Each footstep was in perfect unison. I spun and ran. The ship's layout twisted strangely now, corridors doubling back where they shouldn't, staircases leading me in circles. Every turn I took, I could still hear the echo of synchronized steps behind me. Finally, I stumbled into a side corridor where the hum of the engines grew louder. A man was there, an older passenger slumped on the floor with his back against the wall. His skin was pale, lips cracked, eyes wide open but unfocused. I crouched beside him. "Hey, are you okay?" He grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. His voice rasped out, dry as sandpaper. "Don't open it. Don't ever open it. That's how they get in." My blood went cold. "Who?" But before he could answer, his gaze snapped to the corridor behind me, his face twisted in pure terror. "They've found you." And then his body went slack, collapsing like a puppet with its strings cut. From the shadows at the end of the corridor, I heard it again. That dragging, metallic scrape. Only this time, it wasn't alone. Dozens of whispers layered over it, like the whole ship had joined in. The lights flickered out. Again. Total darkness. Then, just ahead, a door creaked open. And from the void beyond, a pale hand curled around the frame, beckoning me forward. That pale hand gripped the frame, its fingers impossibly long, the nails clicking against the wood like insect legs. My body screamed at me to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I felt pinned, like the air itself had thickened around me. The whispers swelled, no longer muffled through walls. They poured into my head from everywhere, a storm of voices that weren't quite human. Below, below, below. I forced myself to stumble back, but the corridor had changed again. The walls stretched, twisting like soft clay, the patterned carpet running endless under my shoes. The ship was no longer just metal and steel. It was alive, shifting, watching. And still, that hand remained, curled around the open doorway. The gap widened. A face emerged. It was pale, featureless at first, like skin pulled too tightly over bone. Then, slowly, details pressed out from underneath, eyes bulging against the surface, mouths forming where they shouldn't be, whispering in perfect unison. Each face was wrong, like an imitation, faces of the passengers I'd seen in the lounge. I turned and ran. The corridor pulsed with every step, breathing around me. The floor tilted sharply, sending me sprawling. My palms scraped against the carpet that now felt damp, sticky. When I looked down, it wasn't fabric anymore. It was skin. I screamed. I clawed my way forward, toward a faint glow at the far end of the hall. The light swayed like a lantern, but when I reached it, it was just a porthole. Outside, the ocean churned violently beneath the night sky. And there, rising from the black water, was something I can never erase. A shape, larger than the ship itself. A colossal mass with countless arms reaching upward, each one tipped with those same pale hands. Faces writhed across its body, whispering the same word again and again. Below, the ship groaned, tilting as though bowing to it. Passengers poured from nearby corridors, their synchronized steps echoing as they moved toward the porthole. Their eyes were empty, their smiles stretched too wide. They didn't scream. They welcomed it. I backed away, only to feel another hand close around my shoulder. I spun, but there was no face, just a blank mask of skin. The last thing I remember is being dragged toward the numberless door. It opened wider this time, revealing nothing but an impossible darkness, deeper than the ocean itself. The whispers filled me, inside and out. My body went weightless, and I was gone. When the ship docked a week later, my name was on the manifest. But I was not among the passengers who walked ashore. My cabin was empty, save for a single scrap of paper pinned to the door. One word, written over and over, carved so deep it had torn through the wood itself. Below. Story 4. I've read enough passenger testimonies to know one thing. When something goes wrong at sea, it never feels like it starts with a bang. It starts quiet. So quiet you can almost convince yourself you imagined it. That's exactly how this one begins. The ship was called the Radiant Star, a luxury cruise liner famous for its midnight entertainment shows and never-ending buffets. At least, that's what the brochures promised. But if you ask Lucas, a 34-year-old travel blogger from Chicago, what he remembers most, it isn't the food or the music, it's the silence. On his second night on board, while the rest of the passengers filled the main deck for a gala dinner, Lucas had been out on one of the observation balconies, setting up his camera for a time-lapse. The sea was calm, the sky lit up with stars. Perfect conditions. Until it wasn't. The air shifted. Lucas described it later as, like walking into a sealed room. His ears popped, his breath caught in his throat, and then he realized the entire ship had gone completely silent. No footsteps, no laughter, no faint hum of engines. Not even the sound of waves against the hull. It was as if the ship had been dropped into a vacuum. That's when he heard it. Not noise, but a vibration, like something massive brushing along the hull far below. He leaned against the railing, peering down into the black water. For a moment, he thought he saw movement, something vast, pale, and coiling just under the surface. He whispered to himself, "Please tell me that's just my imagination." But then, the balcony door behind him opened. No one stepped out. The door hung wide, creaking in the stillness. The hallway beyond looked darker than it should have, as though the lights had been dimmed only there. Lucas called out, expecting another passenger, maybe even a crew member. No response. Just that heavy, suffocating silence pressing closer. And then, from deep inside the hall, came the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps. Lucas froze where he stood, his camera still ticking quietly as it captured the stars above. But he wasn't looking at the sky anymore. His focus was locked on that hallway, where the footsteps dragged one after the other, heavy and uneven. What made his skin crawl wasn't just the sound. It was the fact that they weren't echoing the way footsteps should on a steel deck. They sounded muffled, like bare feet pressing into damp earth. He whispered into the darkness, "Hello? Is someone there?" No reply. The footsteps stopped abruptly, right at the threshold where the hall light should have illuminated the figure. But there was nothing, only blackness, a kind of darkness thicker than the rest of the ship's shadows. Then came the smell. A damp, briny stench, like rotting seaweed baked in the sun, seeping through the open doorway. Lucas gagged, one hand pressing over his mouth. His instincts screamed to shut the door and run back to the dining hall, pretend this never happened. But his camera was still rolling, pointing straight at the strange dark hallway. The blogger in him, the storyteller in him, whispered, "If you run now, you'll never know what you just caught." So he lifted the camera off the tripod and slowly inched forward. As soon as his foot touched the threshold, the air temperature dropped. Sharp, biting cold that prickled across his skin. He raised the camera, its red recording light faintly reflecting off the walls. Through the lens, he saw something he couldn't see with his eyes alone, a wet, glistening trail smeared along the carpet, leading further inside. Lucas lowered the camera quickly. Without it, the trail was gone. His throat tightened. "Okay, nope. He turned, ready to retreat back out to the balcony. But the door, the same one that had been wide open, slammed shut in his face. The ship shuddered at the impact. His camera slipped in his sweaty hands, almost hitting the floor. And from the far end of the hall, where the shadows clung unnaturally thick, a voice whispered, low, drawn out, and wet-sounding, "Lucas." He nearly dropped the camera for real this time. His name. No one on this ship should know his name. That's when the lights flickered. For half a heartbeat, the hallway lit up. And he saw it. A figure standing at the far end, impossibly tall. Its head bent so far it almost brushed its chest, arms hanging to its knees, skin stretched too tight and glistening like it had just crawled out of the ocean. And then, darkness again. The footsteps resumed. Closer. Lucas pressed his back against the door, fumbling for the handle, but it refused to budge. It wasn't locked. Yet, no matter how he twisted and pulled, it wouldn't open. His heartbeat thundered so loudly in his ears he almost couldn't hear the thing moving toward him. Those dragging, sticky steps, accompanied by the faintest drip, drip, drip on the floor. His camera shook violently in his hands. The lens flickered, trying to adjust to the dim light, and for a moment it caught a glimpse. The thing was closer now, its bent frame jerking unnaturally as it walked. Its neck snapped a little to the side, and Lucas could swear it was grinning, though the grin stretched too far, almost splitting its cheeks. He whispered under his breath, barely audible, "Please, no." The lights buzzed overhead, struggling to stay alive. Each flicker gave him a horrifying strobe-like view of the figure. First, several yards away. Next blink, halfway down the corridor. Next blink, close enough that Lucas could see its dripping hair hanging in clumps, seawater pattering onto the floor. He forced himself to raise the camera again. The viewfinder revealed something his eyes couldn't. Behind the figure, more shadows began to move. Dozens of them. Twisted shapes, their heads bent in the same impossible angle, their feet dragging in unison. Lucas's breath hitched. He pulled his eye away from the camera, only to find the hallway empty. Nothing. No figure, no shadows. Just silence. He let out a shaky laugh, relief flooding his chest. "Jesus Christ, I'm losing it," he muttered. But then his camera made a faint mechanical whir. He glanced down at the screen. It was still recording. And on the playback, the figure was standing inches away. Its grin stretched wide, one skeletal hand reaching for his throat. The lights cut out. The only sound left was the wet rasp of breathing and the sickening drag of something moving closer in the dark. The pitch black was suffocating. Lucas froze, holding his breath, praying the sound of his own heartbeat wasn't loud enough to give him away. His fingers brushed against the wall, desperate for a light switch, a panel, anything. But all he felt was cold steel, slick with moisture. Then the breathing shifted. It was no longer in front of him, it was above. He tilted his head up slowly, every muscle screaming not to. In the dark, something wet dripped onto his cheek. The salt stung his lips. Seawater. He stumbled backward and the camera banged against his chest. The small red recording light blinked, a tiny, defiant glow against the abyss. That's when he realized the ship wasn't silent anymore. From every direction came faint, synchronized thuds, like hundreds of bare feet slapping against metal. Lucas raised the camera with trembling hands, hoping the lens would see what his eyes couldn't. The screen lit up, and his throat locked. The hallway was crowded. Dozens, maybe hundreds of waterlogged figures stood shoulder to shoulder, their skin pale and stretched, their eyes clouded, their mouths parted in silent screams. He whipped the camera away. Darkness. He pointed it back. The dead were still there, closer now. One of them lurched forward, arms twitching unnaturally. The rest followed, their movements jerky but deliberate, converging on him in perfect rhythm. The sound of dripping water filled the air, like rain hitting hollow pipes. "Please, stop," Lucas rasped, pressing his back against the stubborn door. He yanked on the handle again, but it wouldn't budge. Behind him, the steel vibrated, as though someone or something was holding it shut from the other side. The camera screen crackled, static spilling across the image. For an instant, he saw not just the hallway, but the ocean itself flooding the corridor, black waves rushing forward, faces floating just beneath the surface. Then the static cleared, and the dead were nearly upon him. Lucas slammed his fist against the door, screaming. His voice echoed down the hall, swallowed by the sound of the sea. He felt a bony hand brush against his arm, ice cold, clammy. Then, another gripped his shoulder with terrifying strength. The door burst open. He toppled backward into a room that shouldn't have been there. The walls dripped with condensation, lanterns swaying gently as if rocked by waves. At the center of the room sat a rusted table, and on it, an open logbook, pages curling from moisture. He scrambled to his feet, panting. The logbook's ink had bled, but one line remained clear. Another has been chosen. The vessel feeds tonight. Behind him, the door slammed shut. The room filled with the sound of water rising, slow at first, then rushing. Lucas clutched the camera, shaking, whispering into it like a prayer. "If anyone finds this, don't board this ship. It isn't taking you on a cruise. It's feeding." The screen went black. The camera sputtered back to life for a moment, its dim glow reflecting off the rising water. Lucas was waist-deep already, salt stinging his cuts, the cold biting into his bones. He tried the logbook again, flipping frantic pages, hoping for instructions, a way out, anything. But the words were smeared beyond recognition, except for a repeating line that made his stomach drop. They never leave. They only join. A low groan vibrated through the steel walls, not mechanical, but organic, like the belly of something alive. The lanterns flickered and went out, leaving Lucas in darkness again, except for the red recording light on his chest. The water rose to his chest. His breath came in ragged gasps. He pressed the camera close, whispering as if confessing, "It's not a ship, it's a mouth." The water surged suddenly, dragging him under. He fought to surface, but unseen hands gripped his ankles, yanking him deeper. Through the blur of bubbles, he saw them, the drowned passengers, their faces stretched, jaws open too wide, their eyes locked on him as they pulled him down. The current carried him farther than the room should have allowed, deeper, into darkness so complete he could feel it pressing against his skin. The logbook pages floated around him like dying fish, glowing faintly before dissolving into nothing. And then, silence. No water, no struggle, no sound at all. Lucas blinked, and he was standing in a hallway again. Dry, silent, empty. The ship was exactly as it had been on his first night. Polished brass rails, patterned carpet, faint music echoing from the ballroom. His clothes were bone dry, the camera still strapped to his chest. A wave of relief hit him until he noticed something off. Passengers strolled the hall, smiling, chatting, sipping cocktails. But when he looked closer, their eyes were all clouded. Every single one. A steward walked past him, tipping his cap. Lucas opened his mouth to speak, but the steward leaned in first, whispering with a grin too wide for his face. "Welcome aboard. You're one of us now." The camera tilted violently as Lucas staggered back. His own reflection in a nearby glass pane caught his eye, his skin pale, his lips tinged blue, his eyes clouded like the others. He dropped the camera in shock. It hit the floor with a sharp crack, landing on its side. The lens stared up at him as he reached down, trembling, and whispered his last words to whoever might watch later. "I didn't survive the storm. I became part of it." The recording cut to black, the faint sound of water dripping echoing as if from somewhere far below. Story 5. I woke up in my cabin to a sound that didn't belong. It wasn't the gentle hum of the engines or the steady thrum of waves against steel. It was softer, almost like breathing. Not mine, not close either, just faint enough to make me wonder if I was imagining it. My name's Trevor Hayes. I'm 35, work in IT security, and this cruise was supposed to be my first real break after burning out at a job that had me staring at screens 14 hours a day. My sister gifted me the ticket, saying I needed ocean air instead of Wi-Fi signals. She meant well, but if I'm being honest, I was already regretting it. Something about the ship felt wrong from the moment I boarded. The first 2 days seemed normal enough. Buffets that never ended, sunburnt kids screaming near the pool, couples clinking glasses at the deck bar. But underneath all of it, there was this weird undercurrent. Passengers whispered more than they talked. Crew smiled too much, like it was rehearsed. And every night, I'd wake up to that sound, the breathing. Tonight, though, it was different. Louder, closer, like someone standing just outside my cabin door. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. The light above my bunk flickered once, then steadied. I told myself it was just thin walls, maybe a neighbor with sleep apnea. I even laughed a little to shake the nerves. But when I checked the hallway, it was empty, silent, like the ship was holding its breath. At breakfast the next morning, I tried to make small talk with a couple from Ohio. Nice people, mid-50s, on their 10th cruise. When I casually mentioned the strange noises at night, the woman froze mid-bite. Her husband quickly reached over, squeezed her wrist, and forced a laugh. "Old ship's creak, buddy, that's all." But her eyes never left mine, wide and pleading. That night, I decided to stay awake. I sat on the edge of my bed, camera in hand, recording just in case. The hours dragged. Midnight came and went. Just when I thought I'd wasted my time, I heard it again, breathing. Steady, deliberate, right outside my door. I crept closer, camera rolling. My hand shook as I reached for the handle, half hoping it was just some drunk passenger messing around. I pulled the door open in one swift motion, and the hallway was empty. Except the carpet. It was damp, as if someone had been standing there for a long, long time. I crouched down, touching the carpet with my fingertips. It wasn't just damp. It was icy cold, like water fresh from a glacier. My stomach dropped. There hadn't been any spills. No passengers walking by with drinks. Just that breathing. I backed into my cabin and shut the door quietly, locking it even though I knew a flimsy cruise ship lock wouldn't do much. My camera was still recording, the red light blinking in the dark. I whispered into it like some kind of confession. If anyone finds this, I swear there was someone breathing outside my room. but they weren't there, just water. The next morning I went straight to guest services. I tried to sound calm, reasonable, told them about the strange noises, the damp carpet. The crew member behind the desk, a young guy with the kind of forced grin I'd noticed before, didn't even blink. He just nodded, typed something into his computer and said, "We'll send housekeeping to dry it up." No concern, no surprise. That night, the breathing came back. Louder this time. Not outside the door, inside. I froze, my body locking up as the sound filled my cabin. Deep, ragged breaths, like someone was standing just behind me. The air grew heavy, damp. I couldn't bring myself to turn around. I just stared into the camera lens, whispering, "Please, tell me you hear this too." When I finally forced myself to look over my shoulder, the cabin was empty, but the mirror on the opposite wall was fogged over, as if someone had exhaled right against it. I should have demanded a new room. I should have called the captain himself, but something told me it wouldn't matter. Something told me they already knew. 2 days later, the couple from Ohio didn't show up at breakfast. Their usual table sat empty, untouched plates still steaming. When I asked about them, a crew member told me they'd disembarked early at a port, but I knew that wasn't possible. The ship hadn't docked anywhere since we left Miami. That night, I heard the breathing again. Only this time, it wasn't one voice, it was many. Layered, overlapping, coming from the hallway, the ceiling, the walls. Like 100 unseen mouths gasping for air. And then, a single knock on my door. Slow, heavy, final. I didn't answer. I just sat there shaking, the camera recording every second, praying the lock would hold. But the carpet beneath the door glistened with water. The water didn't just glisten, it spread, slowly, deliberately, seeping under the door as though something was pressing against it on the other side. My bare feet recoiled as the carpet chilled my skin, soaking through my socks. The stench hit next. Salt water, but stale, rotten, like it had been trapped in the belly of the ocean for decades. I yanked my camera closer and filmed the door. My hand shook so badly the footage looked warped. "It's happening again," I whispered. "This isn't a leak. This is..." I stopped. What word could cover it? The knock came again. Louder. And then silence. The water stopped spreading. The breathing faded. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the door, the red light of my camera keeping me sane. The next morning, I thought maybe I'd imagined it. Until I stepped into the hall. The carpet outside my cabin was bone dry. No signs of water, no smell of rot, nothing. At breakfast, I scanned the dining room. The couple from Ohio were still missing. Their seats hadn't been reassigned, which made no sense. On cruises, nothing went unused. Passengers filled every inch. But those 2 chairs sat untouched, like placeholders for ghosts. I struck up conversation with a waitress, pushing a little harder than before. She leaned in, lowering her voice. "Don't ask too many questions, sir. Some things are better left beneath." Beneath. That word lingered. Later, I slipped into the ship's library, hoping to clear my head. It was empty, rows of leather chairs and polished wood tables gleaming under warm lamps. But when I sat down with a random book, something fell out. A folded piece of paper, tucked inside like a secret message. It was a torn sheet of lined notebook paper, written in frantic scrawl, "They come back wet, always wet. Don't open the door when they knock. They'll try to make you breathe with them." The handwriting cut off mid-sentence, like the writer had been interrupted. I shoved the note into my pocket and left the library, heart thundering. That night, as I tried to sleep, I heard voices outside my cabin. Not the usual late-night party sounds. These were low, muffled, like people whispering underwater. I pressed my ear to the wall, straining. He didn't listen. She opened the door. Now they'll take another. I stumbled back, clutching my mouth. My pulse roared in my ears. And then, the unmistakable sound of water sloshing against my door. Someone, or something, was back. The sound of water against the door grew heavier, as if waves were pounding against it from the other side. My hand hovered over the handle, but the note from the library flashed in my head. "Don't open the door when they knock." I forced myself back, whispering into my camera, "If I disappear, this is why. It's real. It's all real." The knocking came next, slow, heavy. Each thud shook the frame of the door, rattling the mirror on the opposite wall. The whispers rose into a chorus, garbled like they were bubbling through seawater. "Breathe with us. Come below. Open." And then silence. The next morning, I decided I couldn't keep letting the fear trap me in my cabin. I needed to see what was hidden beneath. I followed the crew-only signs. Normally, guests avoided those areas, but I waited until I spotted a distracted cleaner and slipped through the service door. The air was different here, colder, damp, like the ship itself exhaled salt water. Down the narrow metal staircase, I found myself in an unfamiliar corridor. No polished carpets, no polished brass, just exposed pipes, rust spots, and a faint hum vibrating through the floor. And then I saw it. A locked hatch with a dripping edge, seawater trailing out from its seal. Above it, stenciled in faded paint, the words, "Deck Zero." I crouched down, aiming my flashlight. The water was trickling from the seam of the hatch, forming small puddles that never seemed to spread further, almost like the ship absorbed them. Before I could think, a shadow passed across the corridor behind me. I spun, light shaking wildly. Someone was there. A man in an old-fashioned uniform, not like the crew today. This looked decades out of place, the navy coat torn, soaked through, clinging to him. His skin had that pale, bloated look of someone drowned, his lips tinged blue. I staggered back, whispering, "Oh my God!" His eyes met mine. And then, with a voice like rushing water, he hissed, "Don't breathe alone tonight." I blinked, and he was gone. Only the dripping hatch remained. That night in my cabin, the whispers returned louder, urgent, echoing all around the walls. But this time they weren't asking. They were promising. "We're coming in." And the handle on my cabin door began to turn. The door handle rattled, jerking harder with each movement, as though someone, or something, was on the other side, desperate to get in. I pressed my back to the wall, heart hammering so hard it felt like the sound would give me away. The whispers seeped under the door like fog. "We're already here. You opened the way. Deck Zero waits." And then, just as suddenly, the handle stilled. The silence was worse than the noise. By morning, I couldn't take it anymore. Whatever waited behind that dripping hatch was at the core of everything I'd experienced. Every shadow, every whisper, every drowned figure. If I didn't see for myself, I'd never escape the nightmares. I slipped back into the restricted corridor, camera running, flashlight trembling in my grip. The hatch looked the same, wet, rust-streaked, humming faintly. But this time, the padlock that had sealed it before was snapped clean in half, lying on the floor. The hatch was open. I swallowed hard, pushing it wide. The air that rushed out smelled like salt and rot, sharp enough to sting my eyes. A narrow ladder led down into blackness, water glistening along the rungs. Every instinct told me to turn back. But the whispers pulled me forward. I climbed down. At the bottom was a cavernous, flooded chamber. The walls weren't smooth metal like the rest of the ship. They looked ancient, corroded, like they had been part of another vessel entirely. The water came up to my knees, icy and rippled, though nothing touched it. And then I saw them. Figures floating just below the surface, their faces pale and bloated, hair drifting as though suspended in invisible currents. Their eyes opened in unison, glowing faintly in the dark water. I stumbled back, the camera slipping in my hands. That's when one of the bodies slowly rose, breaking the surface. It was the same drowned officer I'd seen before, his lips pulled back in a broken grin, skin splitting at the seams as he whispered, "You're sailing with us now." Dozens of hands burst up from the water, grasping at me, cold and heavy. I screamed, thrashing, but the more I fought, the more they dragged me down. The flashlight flickered and died. The last thing I recorded was my own reflection in the black water, 100 pale faces staring back behind me. When the ship docked days later, my cabin was empty. My belongings, my camera, Everything gone, like I had never boarded at all. But sometimes, when new guests stay in cabin 7C, they report hearing my voice whispering just before they fall asleep, "Don't breathe alone tonight." Story 6. The tape begins with a sudden burst of static and then a shaky inhalation, as if the person recording is attempting to calm himself. The voice of a man is heard, low and initially unsure. Adrian Cole is my name. On board the Ocean Serenade, I was a steward. For 6 years, I worked contracts at sea, making everything look flawless, smiling for passengers and folding towels into swans. That was my responsibility. Make people happy. Maintain the illusion. However, this tape has nothing to do with buffets or folded towels. It has to do with what I witnessed on that ship. Another pause. The things I can't keep buried anymore. He may be dragging on a cigarette, since you can hear him shifting in his chair. Ohio is where I grew up. There is nothing unique about me. All I needed was money. The cruise line offered travel, decent compensation, and an opportunity to escape the world I was in, but my debt was more than I could handle. Although it wasn't my first ship, the Ocean's Serenade was the largest. Theaters, bars that never closed, 16 decks, and pools that appeared to flow directly into the ocean. People who were already intoxicated by the fantasy boarded with wide eyes. And I did my share. However, something felt off from the first day. He clears his throat. Deck 10 was my allocated location. Every door is the same. The corridors are long and bland, and you can hear the buzz of the motors beneath your feet. Aside from one, 1026 cabin. I sensed it even before I realized it. Outside that door, the temperature dropped. The scent also changed. Typical ship odors include chlorine, salt, and stale air conditioning. However, it was metallic there, similar to rust. The tape crackles, then steadies once again, like water that hasn't moved in years. I initially believed that perhaps there was a problem with the ventilation. However, the crew managed to dodge it. Always. Down the corridor, housekeepers would be giggling until they got to 1026, at which point there would be quiet. Not everyone would even glance at the door. One of the cleaners, Maria, used to rush by with her rosary in her hand. Once, in jest, I asked her, "What's up with 1026? Fearful?" She turned pale, warned me not to make jokes. Not in this place. There was a pause, a slight sound like he was rubbing his hands together. Then she left without saying anything else. At the service desk, I looked through the logbook. Every request, every cabin assignment. The number 1026 was marked as occupied, a last name I was unfamiliar with. However, I never saw anyone enter or exit. The curtains are drawn. The phrase, "Do not disturb," is constantly present. However, housekeeping continued to list it as service complete each and every day. They all denied cleaning it when I asked. Not me. Not me. Nobody took credit for it. Another deep breath. I was bringing back leftover sweets from the late buffet on the 4th night at sea. With the lights humming, the hall was deserted. I heard it at that point. There's a knock. Deliberate and incisive. Hollow, like knuckles on a coffin lid. 3 raps. I went cold. Once more it arrived. Make a knock. Make a knock. Make a knock. Make a knock. When I discovered it was coming from within 1026, my stomach fell. Then I heard someone speaking, muffled, low, and jammed up against the walls. "Help me," it said. He lets out a short, trembling breath. I took off running. I immediately dropped the entire tray onto the carpet and fled. I returned early the following day. The corridor was immaculate. No chocolate stains on the carpet, no desserts broken, nothing. As if it had been wiped out. I informed Carlos, my boss. "You didn't hear anything," he informed me bluntly after turning pale. He walked away after saying, "If you like this job, you didn't hear a damn thing." His voice suddenly becomes hushed, as if he didn't want anyone around him to hear. Following that, people began to disappear. In 624, a middle-aged woman's husband swore she had vanished. Her shoes were neatly lined under the bed, her outfits were still in the closet, and her bags were still zipped. She was never gone. Then he didn't either. After security reassured him, he abruptly vanished as well. What about the logbook? It revealed that 624 had consistently been occupied by one person. He had lost his name. He moves once more, the microphone recording the scrape of his chair, as if it had never happened. I heard 2 officers talking close to the galley one evening. "Another offering already?" remarked one of them. When they noticed me standing there, they pretended nothing had happened and said, "We just had one." However, that word stayed with me. Providing. To whom? To what end? The voice shakes and gets faster, as if he's straining to express everything. I passed the crew bar later that week. There was a crack in the door. Inside, 6 crew members were seated in a circle, hunched over, and spoke in unison. Perhaps a prayer. Or worse. The door slammed shut as soon as one of them saw me. None of them would look me in the eye the next morning. I realized then, the crew was involved in whatever was going on that ship. His breathing quickens, and for a few seconds, all he hears is static. The ship itself had a living quality. The walls moaned more loudly at night. I could feel the floor throbbing beneath my feet. And that cabin, always. 10:26. Quiet. Observing. The door wasn't shut till one night. It had a crack in it. Enough. The tape ends with a loud click, then hisses back briefly before dying entirely. And I swear to God I saw an eye looking out at me. With a trembling palm fumbling with the recorder, the tape hisses back to life. Adrian's breath sounds erratic, as if he had been jogging. I didn't get any rest after that. How was I able to? Through the gap in the door, I could always see that eye peering back at me when I closed my eyes. It went beyond merely gazing. It was researching me, as if it was aware of my identity, my hearing, and my sight. I made an effort to convince myself that it was a dream the following morning. Stress, exhaustion. You get tired from this job, don't you? Then, however, passengers began to behave strangely. I heard a couple whispering at breakfast. The guy said that his wife was meant to meet him at the buffet and kept inquiring where she had gone. She never appeared. He placed food on a platter for her despite his shaking hands, as if he couldn't believe she was gone. He was gone by dinner too, simply gone. He was questioned. But the crew? "Sir, you must be mistaken," they simply answered with a smile. Like it was practiced, he boarded by himself. A faint tap-tap-tap sounds, as though Adrian's fingers are tapping against the recorder. I made an effort to stay active. Don't linger in the hallways and don't ask inquiries, I told myself. However, I couldn't ignore the ship. I was replenishing linens that night when I heard voices behind the crew-only door in the service corridor, chanting softly while rhythmically rising and falling. I leaned in. Even though we were 12 decks above the ocean, the putrid and thick stench of seawater surged out. A phrase in a language I didn't understand was repeatedly muttered by someone. I put my ear to the metal door. He pauses, gasping for air. The smallest background sound, like a thump, is picked up by the tape. Upon the chanting ceased. Dead quiet. And a whisper from the opposite side. Not in English. Not in Spanish. Something scraping, guttural. They could see I was listening, even though I didn't understand the words. I sprinted before the door opened. He moves, possibly pacing, as the recorder scratches. Passengers continued to vanish. Even worse, people began to change. A teenage guy and his parents were on the road. He liked to splash and laugh as he ran around the pool deck. One day, he spent hours sitting still in a deck chair and gazing at the horizon. Not blinking, not moving. His parents pleaded with him to eat and converse. Nothing. Simply looking. 3 chairs were vacant the following morning. They had lost their family. The manifest was cleared of all traces. There was a prolonged pause. His voice then becomes nearly whispery. I looked at 1026 once more. There was no longer a do not disturb sign. The hall's temperature was so high that I think I could see my own breath fogging in the air. even though the door was locked. In the Caribbean, mid-July, like a freezer door opening, my skin pricked, and the sound, faint, clawing from within, slow, methodical. The tape hisses before Adrian speaks more quickly and frantically, as though something were grabbing at the walls and attempting to escape. I began to put everything in writing: names, number of cabins, absences. However, my notes vanished every morning, not lost, gone. The pages of my notepad would be blank or empty. The word STOP was once written in strong black marker over the final page when I woke up. It wasn't written by me. That kind of marker isn't even mine. His breathing becomes shakier and louder, and my cabin door had been locked from the inside all night. I was unable to inform the passengers. Who would trust me? They would label me insane. Already the crew gave me a peculiar look, as if I had seen too much. On few evenings I noticed them observing me, not merely looks. Observing. When they thought I wasn't looking, I smiled. The storm then arrived. No buildup, no warning. Waves towering like mountains, horizon swallowed by black skies. Even though I've experienced rough waves before, this wasn't normal. The sea shouted as though it were alive. Glasses broke in the dining hall, passengers yelled, and lights flickered until we were engulfed in darkness. And I heard it knocks in the darkness. Not only in 1026, from each ceiling and each wall. His frantic breathing, which sounds almost like sobbing, is captured on film. Hundreds of fists pounding, begging to be let out. In the stairway, I noticed a young girl holding her mother's hand. For a moment, their faces were illuminated by lightning, and then the child ceased to be a child. Its skin was gray and wet, and its eyes were black pits. The mother yelled, but she was by herself when the lights came back on. He gulps loudly as he tries to regain his composure. And then she wasn't there at all. I passed the officers, lounged during the storm. The door was slightly ajar. The senior staff and the captain were inside, standing around a table with their hands clasped together. In front of them was a map of the ocean, with red ink symbols scribbled on it. They were chanting, one of them. The others gave serious nods. The captain's voice then said, "It must be enough to carry us through. But how much? Enough. Who?" I realized then that the passengers weren't disappearing. They were being given. For a few seconds, there is only static and silence. "I should have quit," Adrian said in a hoarse, nearly broken voice. "I should have taken my chances with the waters and leaped overboard. However, I didn't. Because I, too, had something waiting for me. I sensed it. There was breathing in cabin 1026. It was being fed by the storm. And I was next." The tape clicks hard once more. A slight static fills the silence while the recorder whirs, and then Adrian's voice returns, strained and weaker. "I believed that I might live if I avoided 1026 and kept my head down. However, the ship has a way of drawing you in the direction it desires. The storm hadn't subsided that evening. Every wave caused the hulls to tilt, and the lights flashed as if the wiring were drowning. I heard it again, scratching, while I was carrying towels. This time, don't faint." Out loud, in a desperate situation. The door was wide open, and it was coming from 1026. He exhales sharply, the microphone crackling. I ought to have continued to walk. I should have run, for heaven's sake. However, I peered inside. There was nobody in the room, no bags, no bed, no carpet, only exposed steel and salt water-soaked walls. And the stench, rotten seawater, akin to sun-killed fish. There was a black, wide drain in the center of the floor, similar to those found in industrial kitchens. Despite being 10 levels above the ocean, water was sloshing up through it. And there were murmurs coming from the drain. There is a pause while dozens of voices overlap, as if they were trapped just below. Something dropping, a faint noise in the background. Adrian says he's sorry beneath his breath and goes on. As I listened, rooted in place, I heard footsteps behind me. My shoulder was gripped by a hand. One of the senior stewards, Martinez, was there. He had an iron grasp. His eyes were not irate as he leaned down and spoke. "You weren't assigned to this deck tonight." They were afraid. After pushing me into the hallway, he closed the door behind us. "Never look into the drain," he added, leaning near once more before I could respond. "The tape pops," as if Adrian put it down and then picked it up again. "That's how they take you." He then left as if nothing had occurred. I was unable to sleep in my cabin after that. Despite the sink being dry, I could still hear water flowing in the darkness. I once woke up coughing, my throat stinging from the salt, my bed soaking through. Bone dry, though, when I switched on the lights. My linens, my outfit, everything. Additionally, the team no longer concealed it. Late at night, I saw them moving in groups, lanterns in hand, down service stairwells. Their eyes were sunken, their faces pallid. I did follow once, but from a distance. The machines were silent as they assembled in the washing room, of all places. Once more I heard their steady, low chanting, followed by the sound of a heavy object being pulled across the floor, a form beneath a sheet, too human and too long to be laundry. He says, "I didn't stay to see what they did with it." His voice becomes strained in cracks. The buffet line was shorter the following morning. The entire family is gone. Nobody brought them up. Not even the other travelers who had shared their laughter the previous evening, as if they were wiped out. Just me, I recalled. I then understood that it was also taking place in people's brains. This ship does more than simply steal bodies. Memory is required. Makes it simpler to continue feeding. His breathing is erratic, as if he is suppressing his tears, and the tape crackles. I visited the captain's workspace. I had no idea what was going through my mind. Perhaps I believed that by confronting him, I could frighten him and make him acknowledge it. He was waiting, though, when I opened the door, as if he had anticipated me. There was only one logbook on his empty desk. "Read it," he urged, sliding it in my direction. He spoke in a soothing tone. Too quiet. The log contained more than simply numbers and dates. Names were involved, passenger lists. Every journey dates back several decades. And a symbol, a circle with ragged lines through it, beside a few names. I turned the page. Dozens, hundreds. There are thousands of names marked, entire families. I glanced up at him and saw the repeated words in the margins. "The sea must be paid. That's why we never sink," he simply replied with a smile. Static eats his words for a second before his voice returns, shaking. Clinging to that reality like poison in my veins, I staggered out of there. Travel was never intended for the ship. It was intended for consumption. The cycle is repeated when the ship survives and the sea takes. However, the storm was not abating at this point. 3 days had passed. 3 evenings. Perhaps the land had been forgotten, the passengers murmured. That perhaps the outside world has vanished. And they were correct as I glanced at the horizon. Not a star. No coastline. The tape clicks. Just endless black water, swallowing us whole. A long moment of silence. The recorder starts up again as Adrian whispers, "I think we've already left the world behind." A faint wind howls in the background, as if Adrian is sitting next to an open vent. He sounds almost whispery now, as though he's worried someone might hear. The storm had moved beyond the outside. It was within the walls, under the lights, everywhere. As they paced the corridors and whispered about land that never materialized, the passengers were restless. Some became ill. They coughed seawater into their hands, had pale complexion and bloodshot eyes. However, despite the salty odor following them everywhere, the doctors continued to smile and claim it was only motion sickness. There was a lengthy pause. Adrian's faint breathing is audible. Then he goes on. "I was awakened one night by a knock, on the inside of the walls, not on my door. Slow. Empty. Like a person imprisoned in steel. I swear, I heard voices as I pressed my ear against it, pleading, begging, scratching. People were being sucked into the ship. I dashed to the corridor. It had been heard by others as well. When I looked again, I didn't see the woman in her bathrobe who was standing motionless with tears running down her cheeks and repeating, "That's my husband's voice." Only her damp, salt-dripping slippers. The static intensifies for a second before subsiding. I was at my breaking point. I made the decision to speak with Martinez. The only person who had showed me terror rather than mindless obedience was him. In the crew mess, I discovered him with trembling hands and his eyes fixed on his tea. I insisted on answers. After giving me a long look, he muttered, "This ship doesn't sail the ocean." I asked him what he meant when he said, "It sails the offering." His voice cracked as he leaned in. "The sea takes what is due on every voyage. We give it food, or we're all taken. That's the deal." He said, crying, "You weren't meant to hear the drain." The tape hisses. That means it's already chosen you. In the distance, a chair scratches. Adrian's words flow quickly now, and he sounds scared. I followed them once more that evening. The crew. They skipped the laundry room this time. They descended farther below deck than was permitted for passengers. Down to a service-only door, the lock was smashed, as if it had never been fixed. I crept inside. The air was salty and chilly. The corridor opened onto a huge room with leaking pipes and a seawater slick floor. And there was a pit in the middle, a rusted, iron-lined, spherical, yawning hole. Even though we were well above the ocean's surface, black water swirled below. Chanting, the crew crowded around it. They no longer had their own voices. Then, someone was shoved in. A man screaming in fear, gagged and shackled. I knew who he was. 3 nights prior, he was the traveler who had sat next to me during supper. As he struck the water, his shouts reverberated, and suddenly there was silence. Just rumbles. He had been carried by the sea. There was a sudden thud, as if Adrian briefly dropped the recorder. His voice is shaking when it returns. They noticed me. They all turned at the same time. Behind them lived their eyes, murky and foggy like the sea itself. Among them was Martinez, who remained silent despite the tears still streaming down his cheeks. All he said was, "Run," and I did. But now I sense it. The ship is observing me. The walls are breathing. The sea itself is waiting. The storm outside isn't a storm at all. A long, quiet, hungry, static only. Then, almost too softly, if you're listening to this tape, the Oceanish has sailed again. Avoid getting on it. Don't trust the pamphlets. You don't go to heaven on this cruise. It leads you to the sacrifice. And there's no turning back once you're selected. The tape clicks. Dead air. There was silence for a few seconds, and then scratching from within the actual recorder. And one last whisper, this time not in Adrian's voice. A bubbling, moist creature that says, "We remember you now." Story 7. Secrets are not kept by the ocean. They are swallowed. Keeps them in place. Occasionally, it even murmurs them back. Mark Reynolds is my name. I'm a 44-year-old Boston-born history teacher. On a luxury cruise, I'm not the kind of person you'd anticipate, but I needed a way out after my divorce. I received a cruise coupon that I never utilized as a retirement gift from my pupils, and since I had nothing left to tie me to my house, I reasoned, why not? On the water for 7 days. Sun food. Keep quiet. Perhaps even an opportunity to experience life as more than a single, empty classroom. That was the strategy. The first night on board was uneventful until I met her, ... I watched a comedy show in the lounge, drank too much wine, then ate dinner at the buffet. I was prepared to collapse in my cabin by midnight, but I heard someone humming as I passed one of the viewing decks. She was a woman with long black hair blowing in the sea breeze as she leaned on the railing. Her outfit was very light for the cold weather. It was a delicate blue color. I reduced my speed. There was something eerie about the melody. I forced a smile and responded, "Beautiful night." She avoided eye contact, simply continued to hum. "Are you going alone?" I inquired. I believe my heart skipped a beat when she turned this time. She had a pallid face, too pale. Her eyes were too vacant, and her lips were a shade too black. "They never stop calling," she said gently, and I swallowed. "I apologize, but what?" Her hair cascaded down her cheek as her head slowly tipped. She turned her gaze from me to the dark horizon. She said, "They want someone to listen." She turned back to the sea and left before I could reply, saying, "No one ever listens." I'm not saying that she left. The area where she had been was deserted in the instant it took me to blink. No one was on the deck. The metal rails were howling in the night wind. And all of a sudden, I felt extremely cold. I told myself I had dreamed it the following morning. Jet lag. Too much wine. Perhaps I had fallen asleep by the rail and dreamed the entire thing. It didn't feel like a dream, though. Her voice was a whisper against the ship's hum, echoing in my mind. They never stopped calling. I sat at a table with a view of the pool deck for breakfast. Couples laughed, families splashed, and servers carried platters full of pancakes and omelets. Typical. Too typical. However, when I casually brought it up to a steward who was refilling my coffee, his hand stopped in the middle of pouring. I said, "Pardon me, but last night I met a woman. Blue clothing, black hair. Humming, she was on the starboard observation deck. Are you aware if she performs on board?" The steward's face turned white. Without pouring, he put down the coffee pot. "What was she wearing, according to you?" "A dress in a light blue color." "Why?" His mouth tensed. "No one on board fits that description." "Perhaps a traveler?" I pushed. After looking around, he leaned in. He lowered his voice. I scowled and said, "You didn't see her." "You mean that I didn't notice her?" As he collected the mugs, his hands trembled. I spoke to her. "You ought not to discuss it. Not in this place. Kindly, sir. For your own sake." He quickly left, leaving my coffee unopened and cold. I couldn't get rid of it for the remainder of the day. I thought I would see her again at every turn and in every face in the crowd. However, I didn't. Not till that evening. I had trouble falling asleep. The engine's buzz was strangely louder, resonating through the walls like a racing heartbeat. I ended up returning to the observation deck, which was where I had been earlier. She was present, the lady wearing the blue gown, humming the same eerie, low tune, leaning over the railing. I went cold. I have a dry throat. "You," I muttered, pale and dark with shadow. Her gaze slipped toward me. "Tonight, they're louder," she whispered. I took a swallow. "Who?" "The ones below." I felt sick to my stomach. "You mean the gang below?" A little smile flickered over her lips. "No." A gust of wind whipped across the deck. "The ones the sea kept." I blinked, and she was gone once more. However, she left something behind this time. One wet card lay on the railing where she had been standing. My fingers were trembling as I lifted it up. Elizabeth Hale. The name on it was a passenger ID card, cabin 412. I hurried inside, my heart pounding. It took a very long time for the elevator to descend to deck 4. The carpet muffled my hasty steps, and the hallway was deserted. Cabin 412. I knocked. No response. I knocked more forcefully. I inserted the ID card into the slot at last. The door opened with a click. Inside, the cabin was immaculate. The bed is made up well. The lights go off. Not a single bag. No personal belongings. Empty. With one exception, though. There was a framed picture on the nightstand. The lady wearing the blue gown. Hale Elizabeth. Grinning. And I was the one standing next to her in the photo. My knees gave way. I sat looking at the picture from the edge of the bed. I was the one. I wore the same jacket and face when I boarded, so there was no mistake. However, the picture appeared aged and sun-faded. Elizabeth's hand gripped my arm as if it were her own, and my image froze next to her, her pale smile too broad. "This isn't real," I muttered to the empty cabin, but the quiet surrounding me didn't agree. I slid out of the cabin, pushed the picture face down, and ran down the hallway. Sweat trickled down my temples and my chest heaved. I required clarification. A young crew member at the guest services desk had an overly bright smile. "Sir, how may I help you?" I gave the ID card a slap. "Elizabeth Hale. Cabin 412. I must know about her." The grin disappeared. His eyes darted from side to side as he gently took up the card. Then, as if it were tainted, he slid it back to me. "That name does not belong to any passenger," he stated. He spoke in a crisp, practiced voice. I yelled, "I was just in her cabin." I looked at her picture. "This ship has her." His mouth twitched. His mask shattered for a second. He said, "You must stop asking questions." I leaned closer and said, "For your own safety, be honest with me. Who is she?" After swallowing, he looked around and then leaned forward. He lowered his voice to a quivering murmur. "She drowned. Hopper view in this vessel. My blood turned to ice 10 years ago." "That isn't feasible. I just saw her," he said, his gaze darting anxiously to the dim areas of the foyer. "You should leave her alone because of this. Some travelers never get off the ship." Before I could ask more questions, a senior officer showed up and put a hand on the crewman's shoulder. Some voices never stop calling. He grinned tooth and nail. "Sir, is everything okay here?" he questioned me. The younger crewman gave me a little shake of his head as I opened my mouth. I backed away and mumbled, "Yes," as his eyes cried out, "Don't. It's all right." I didn't sleep that night. Outside my door, every ship creak sounded like footsteps. There was a faint, familiar hum in every blast of wind. I couldn't stand it any longer, so at 2 in the morning, I left my cabin and explored the corridors. The ship was eerily silent, with only the steady hum of the engines to be heard instead of laughing or footsteps. I froze when I passed cabin 412 once more. The door stood open. Faint light glowed inside, then humming, the same eerie, low tune. As I pulled the door open, my heart was racing. Still wearing her pale blue dress, Elizabeth sat on the bed and brushed her long black hair slowly and methodically. The picture was upright again on the nightstand. However, it wasn't just her and me this time. Dozens of people were now visible in the shot. Various travelers, various years. And Elizabeth stood grinning in each one. I raised the frame with trembling hands. The faces peered back at me. Some had apprehensive smiles, while others had hollowed-eyed, nearly exhausted looks. They were all standing next to Elizabeth. Dozens of them. Others donned clothes from several decades earlier, bell-bottoms, wide collars, and hairstyles that are long out of style. Others, like the crew's lanyards, baseball caps, and shorts, appeared more recent. Various times. Various journeys. One thing, though, brought them all together. None of them appeared to be alive. To the empty room, I muttered, Who are they?" I whirled as Elizabeth's voice drifted softly behind me. "They were like you." With her hair loose and the brush still in her pale fingers, she sat cross-legged on the bed. "Interesting. Lonely. Lost." She glanced at the pictures. My throat constricted as I said, "And the sea called them home. Is it true that they are missing passengers?" Her eyes did not meet her widening smile. "They remain present. Are you unable to hear them?" I made an effort to listen. Until it wasn't, the room was quiet. It initially sounded like the groaning of the ship's pipes. Then voices, faint, low, layered, whispering. There are too many to count. A few people sobbed. A few pleaded. Some screamed, sounding muted, as if they were submerged. I clutched my ears and staggered back. "What on earth are you?" Slowly, Elizabeth stood up. The length of her shadow on the cabin wall was abnormally long. She muttered, "I was the first. I was carried away by the storm." Her eyes darkened, black bleeds into white. Yet the ship kept me. And now it keeps them too. With my heart pounding, I ran out of the cabin and slammed the door shut. However, the murmurs persisted, reverberating through the corridor and leaking through the walls. My hands were shaking uncontrollably by the time I got to my own cabin. After shoving the picture into my bag and slamming it shut, I passed out on the bed. But I realized I wasn't alone as soon as the lights went out. A gentle, repetitive sound sounded from the corner of the room, sweeping, the same steady brush strokes over long hair, then humming. I went cold. At first, there was only a faint humming, a thread of sound piercing the darkness. However, it expanded, elongating and encircling me like a chilly hand. I remained motionless. Couldn't. My ears were straining, and my breath was shallow. The slow, steady brushstrokes that dragged through lengthy hair were apparent. However, I was by myself. I don't think this is true," I said. I trembled when I spoke. The humming ceased. A whisper brushed against my ear in the solitude. "Observe." My bag. I shook my hands and unzipped it. The picture frame was on top of my clothing, even though I vowed to have pushed it far under everything. My fingers were shaking as I took it out. The picture was different. Numerous faces continued to stare back, locked and hollow. However, there was one more now. Mine. I dropped the frame and stumbled back. The image was still there, even if the glass broke against the floor. "No," I whispered. The whispers grew louder. "No, this isn't real." More volume. The voices of many rose together, weeping, begging, calling my name. "Mark." I squeezed my ears, but the voices made their way directly into my head. The door of the cabin shook. Once, twice. Then it creaked open slowly. Elizabeth's delicate clothing shimmered faintly in the darkness as she stood in the doorway. "It's easier if you don't fight," she muttered, her black eyes staring at me. Shadows gathered behind her. The faces, blurry, quivering silhouettes from the picture, their mouths open in mute moans. Heart thumping, I staggered back against the bed. "What are you looking for from me?" Her mouth curled into the same overly broad grin. The shadows rushed forward, saying, "They want someone new to listen." I let out a yell. The lights then went off. Sunlight streamed through the cabin porthole as I awoke. Children laughing, drinks clinking, and an announcement over the intercom brought the ship's hum back to life. Typical. As if nothing had occurred. However, my blood froze when I looked at the nightstand. The picture frame was tucked away next to the lamp. In the center, Elizabeth stood grinning while holding a brush, and I was standing next to her, smiling rigidly. I was immobile for hours. I sat on the bed's edge and gazed at the picture on the bedside table. As I stood motionless next to Elizabeth, my own face gave me a rigid smile in return. I prayed it would change each time I blinked, that my picture would disappear, that it was simply fatigue, a phantasm triggered by restless nights. However, it never did. It remained, making fun of me. The intercom rang, as happy as ever. "Good morning, gentlemen and ladies. At 11 a.m. today, we will dock at Cozumel, Mexico. Please prepare your paperwork for disembarkation." Outside, passengers hurried along the hallway, laughing, conversing, and planning their day. Everyday existence. Clinging to my suitcase as if it were a reality check, I staggered out of my cabin. There was no sign of the fear that had gripped me all night as people smiled and walked by. Had I lost my mind? Desperate for land, for freedom, I rushed with the others toward the gangway. I became aware of it at that point. Every few seconds, a head turned toward me from somewhere in the crowd. Not travelers. Crew. They stared. Too much time. Too chilly. And each and every one of them muttered the same thing to themselves when I looked into their eyes. I froze in the middle of the gangway line as I heard the words, "He's marked." "Move it, buddy." A woman behind me growled impatiently, but I was unable to do anything. When the crew member who was scanning IDs looked up at me, His smile disappeared. My passport was not taken by him. My card was not scanned. "You can't leave," he growled, leaning in instead. No more. A red beep sounded on the scanner. No access. Those behind me moaned in frustration. However, as if I weren't there, the crewman waved them past me, as though I wasn't even real. I made another, louder attempt. "I must leave this ship." His eyes become stony. "You already have." Suddenly, he turned away from me. I staggered off, my chest exploding with fear. As they stepped onto the gangway and into the sunlight, passengers poured by. Free. My hand went through one man like vapor as I reached out to take his shoulder. He did not respond, didn't notice me, didn't sense me. I stumbled back, my heart thumping. In the adjacent glass window, my image flickered, dim and transparent, fading. Then I saw that I wasn't alone in the mirror in the window. Elizabeth grinned and brushed her long black hair as she stood behind me. I could read the words as plainly as if she had whispered them in my ears since her lips moved, but no sound was produced. "You belong to the sea now." I sailed through the ship like a ghost for the remainder of that day. Under the Caribbean sun, passengers drank, joked, and posed for pictures. They didn't see me. The cold curled around me with each stride, yet none of them felt it. I gave up battling it by the evening. I gazed out into the infinitely dark sea from the railing. The tiny flickering of my reflection on the glass resembled static. Elizabeth showed up next to me, using the same steady pattern to brush her hair. "Don't you see it now?" she whispered. "Who am I?" My voice broke. Her smile broadened, piercing and incorrect. "Not at all. Who? You belong to us." The whispers returned that evening. More volume. More powerful. The voices of the lost shook the walls of my hut as they flooded inside. "Help us. Find us. Take us." I screamed and gripped my head, but the words just got louder. Elizabeth's clothing trailed like mist as she emerged from the shadows. She tilted her head and knelt before me. "They're standing by." I angrily shook my head, adding, "And they're hungry." "No, I won't." "You did." She set the broken picture frame on my lap. I felt sick to my stomach. Once more, the image had changed. The group of faces had gotten bigger this time. Too big. New travelers looked back at me with smiles, trepidation, and vitality. I recognized faces, since I had witnessed them today, at the swimming pool, at the buffet, on the deck. They were already confined now. The frame was thrown across the room by me. The picture was unharmed, even though the glass broke. Elizabeth whispered like ice as she drew up close. "There's no need for a quarrel. Simply observe. Simply pay attention." The lights in the cabin flickered violently before going out. The sea takes care of the rest. I was completely engulfed by darkness, and I sensed them in that oppressive black. The hands, chilly, holding on, dragging me down. Not in bed, not inside the cabin, into the actual sea. I was outside my cabin when I opened my eyes. I was in the opulent dining room. None of the passengers gave me a glance as they ate, joked, and clinked glasses. They had no idea I was there. Elizabeth hummed as she stood on the balcony above. Her brush glinted in her palm as she gazed down at me with a broad smile. And I got it. I was no longer a passenger. I belonged to the ship, a part of the tide that would never stop beckoning in whispers.